So we've been talking about microorganisms, and today we want to continue with that, and we're talking about carriers of microorganisms. So how do these microorganisms move from one place to another? We've established that microorganisms are found everywhere. So how do these microorganisms move around? They move around through the carriers, the agents that carry them around. So what do we mean by carriers? Now, carriers are the agents which are capable of transferring or carrying microorganisms from one place to another. So carriers are just the medium or the means by which these microorganisms can move from one place to another. We've established that microorganisms are everywhere in the air we breathe, even inside our body. There are microorganisms everywhere. So carriers are just simply these agents that move microorganisms from one place to another. Now we have living agents and non-living agents that carry these microorganisms from place to place. Now the non-living agents that carry microorganisms include air, water, and food. So we also have those are the non-living agents. So we also have the living agents that carry microorganisms from place to place. Now these living agents are, when we say living, we're obviously talking about plants or animals. But mostly, since it's animals that move from one place to another, animals are the living agents that carry microorganisms. Now, these animals are called vectors. Now, vectors are animals which transfer the living agents called pathogens from one place to another. What do we mean by this? Pathogens are disease-causing organisms. So, vectors carry pathogens from one place to another. So these pathogens are mostly microorganisms. So vectors are animals that carry microorganisms that cause diseases from one place to another. These carriers or these vectors that we're talking about can make use of different parts of their body or of their bodies to carry these microorganisms from place to place. For example, the vectors could make use of their legs, their wings, their mouth parts, or their hairy body to carry microorganisms from one place to another. The microorganisms could be found on any part of the vectors. It could be in their mouth, it could be in their legs, it could be in their wings, it could be in their mouth parts, it could be on the body that is hairy. If the body of the vector contains hair or is covered by hair, microorganisms can be found there also. Now, so microorganisms can be found in all those parts of an insect. Now, these animal vectors that carry microorganisms, they could carry them in two ways. It could be mechanically or biologically. So vectors can carry microorganisms biologically or mechanically. So let's talk about these two ways in which animal vectors can carry microorganisms. Now, let's start with the mechanical method. Now, in the mechanical method of carrying microorganisms or carrying of pathogens, the animal vectors that we've established carry pathogens on their body, the surface of their body. It could be any parts of their body. Now, these pathogens are carried passively. What I mean by this is that the microorganisms that the animal vectors are carrying around are not growing. You know, we've confirmed that microorganisms can grow wherever they are found. Now, microorganisms on animal vectors are carried passively. They do not grow or multiply on the body of the vector. Now, these animal vectors that carry in this method, they usually breed and are found in filthy places. What I mean by filthy places? Examples include rubbish heaps, feces, drains, gutters, and they also like to feed on our food. For example, the housefly. The housefly could carry pathogens from filthy places like the heaps, the refuse dumps that we've mentioned, and carry those pathogens or microorganisms to the house. Then it could feed on our food that human beings eat and contaminate it. So that way is the mechanical method of carrying microorganisms. So the microorganisms attach themselves, or they are found on the body, they are carried by the animal vectors from wherever they are found, then carried into a place where they can infect another organism. So that's the mechanical method of carrying microorganisms. So as I mentioned, the housefly is an example of an animal vector that carries microorganisms mechanically. Now, a housefly has a hairy and sticky body. So this enables it to carry pathogens or microorganisms from one place to another. Now, examples of the pathogens that can be carried by the mechanical method of carrying microorganisms include Salmonella enteritis and Vibrio cholerae. So those are examples of pathogens that can be carried by the mechanical method. Now, let's move on to the biological method of carrying microorganisms. Now, in this method, what happens is that the vector that is carrying the organisms becomes infected by feeding on the body fluid of an infected person or animal. Let me explain what I mean by this. A vector, or the animal that is going to become the vector that wants to carry the microorganism, not intentionally, obviously, the way it gets the microorganism to its body or into itself in this way is by feeding on another animal. So when this vector feeds on another animal, it could be the body fluid of the animal, for example, the blood. Major example we have with that is the mosquito. So if the mosquito feeds on the blood of an infected person or something like that, and other insects like insect vectors or animal vectors, they carry the pathogens that are inside the blood of that infected person or animal. Now, this pathogen develops and multiplies in the body of the vector. So after some time, this vector infects a healthy person or a healthy animal while feeding on the body fluids. So it's just like a pathway. What happens is the vector feeds on an infected person, on the blood of an infected person, then it takes up the pathogens that are inside the blood of that infected person, then feeds on another person that is uninfected, a healthy person, then passes that pathogen. Because of it has taken pathogens while feeding on an healthy person, those pathogens will be transferred while feeding on a healthy person. So this vector now infects that healthy person while feeding on the person's body fluids. So many viruses and protozoa are carried by this method. For example, we have Aedes mosquito. Now this Aedes mosquito carries the virus that causes fever. So when this Aedes mosquito bites an uninfected person or a healthy person, the virus that causes fever can be transferred into that healthy person and can cause diseases in that healthy person. We also have tsetse fly. Now tsetse fly can carry the protozoan trypanosoma, which could cause the sleeping sickness in humans or cattle or other animals. And that sleeping sickness is also called trypanosomiasis, named from the protozoan that causes it. So tsetse fly can carry the protozoan into his body, then infect an healthy person with sleeping sickness or trypanosomiasis. Now we also have more examples, lots of examples of insects or vectors that carry microorganisms or diseases and the diseases they cause. So let's list them. We have the female Anopheles mosquito. That's a vector. Then it carries the Plasmodium microorganism, which is a protozoan. It carries Plasmodium. So that is the pathogen that it carries. Then it infects an healthy person with malaria. So that's the disease it causes. So what happens is a female Anopheles mosquito bites an healthy person and the person is infected with Plasmodium, which causes malaria. So that is the way diseases are transmitted by insect vectors through the biological method. So another example of an insect vector is the tsetse fly. Now the tsetse fly infects a healthy person with the trypanosome microorganism. Then this trypanosome pathogen or microorganism infect the person with sleeping sickness, as we mentioned earlier. Then we also have the housefly. Housefly infects or carries the Vibrio cholerae. That's a pathogen. Then, when it infects an healthy person, it could infect the person with cholera and typhoid fever. So that is another insect vector and the disease it causes. So another insect vector or insect vectors that infect healthy people or healthy animals with diseases is the rat flea or the body louse. Now this this vector or carrier, not all of them are insects, some of them are animals. So we've been mentioning mosquito, housefly, tsetse fly, those ones are insects. Now this rat flea is also an insect. It infects or it carries the microorganism called rickettsia. Rickettsia, that's a pathogen that is found in the body of the rat flea, and it infects a healthy person with a disease called typhus. So another example of another disease that will be caused by another microorganism or an insect vector is the plague. And the plague is carried by the insect vector called rat fleas. And the pathogen in it that causes this plague is called bacteria. So the rat fleas carries bacteria and infects an healthy person with the plague. Now, another example that we have is the Aedes mosquito. Now, this Aedes mosquito carries the pathogen or the microorganism, it carries the virus in it. Now, this virus causes yellow fever or dengue fever. So that is that about biological method of carrying microorganisms. So we've listed some vectors, insect vectors, that carry microorganisms, which we call pathogens, that can cause diseases. So they carry those pathogens in them, the pathogens multiply, then they infect an healthy person, then cause diseases in that healthy person. Now, let's talk about pathogenic microorganisms. As we've mentioned, pathogens are disease-causing organisms. So these pathogens find their way into our bodies and bodies of animals. Not only human beings can be infected by diseases, animals can also be infected. So these pathogens that cause diseases find their way into the body of healthy animals or healthy humans and cause diseases in their bodies. Examples of the ways they find themselves or they find their ways into our bodies include: one, they establish themselves in our body when the body resistance is low. So pathogens can establish themselves in our bodies or find their ways into our bodies when the body resistance is low. An example is the HIV virus. So the HIV virus reduces the resistance of the body of a person. So the person's body resistance becomes low. So other pathogens infect that person because the body resistance is low. So that's the way pathogens can enter the body when the body resistance is low. Another reason why pathogenic microorganisms can establish themselves in a healthy person is when the normal microflora in the body is disrupted by antibiotic therapy. Now, in humans or in animals, we have a normal level of microflora. They are little microorganisms. So they are tiny, as the name implies, microflora. So there is a normal level that should be in every person. There's a certain level that is not harmful to the person. So this microflora, when the normal level is disrupted, the body can be infected by pathogens. So one way that this microflora can be disrupted is by antibiotic therapy. So if a person is taking drugs, maybe antibiotics, the body resistance, the microflora in the body could be increased or could be disrupted to leave its normal level, the normal position is supposed to have, or the total number is supposed to have, and that could cause pathogens to enter the body. Another way the Another way the pathogens can establish themselves is in infants, when the normal level of microflora is not established yet. So that's why many infants fall sick easily, because the normal level of microflora that they should have in their body hasn't been established yet. So pathogens can infect that infant or baby. Now, we've said the way microorganisms or pathogenic microorganisms find their way into the body of a healthy person or establish themselves in a person is when the body resistance is low. So we want to talk about some conditions that can cause the body resistance of a person or an animal to be low, or some conditions that can reduce the body's ability to fight these pathogens. Because every human being or animal, in fact, all living organisms have mechanisms in place. They have systems in place to fight these foreign objects or foreign organisms in the body. So when the body is unable to fight it properly, these pathogens can establish themselves. So what are the conditions that could bring about something like this? One is malnutrition. So if a person is not eating enough, or if an animal is not eating enough, or not eating the required amount of food, or not eating a balanced diet, that could result in malnutrition. And that malnutrition could result in the body resistance and ability to fight diseases and pathogens to be low. Another condition is when someone is stressing himself or herself or overworking. When a person stresses too much or does too much work than the body can take, it could cause the body resistance to become low. And this can lower the body's ability to fight or resist pathogens. Another condition that can cause a body's resistance to be lowered is habits, harmful habits like drinking, smoking, taking of hard drugs. So these hard drugs or drinks or foreign substances affect some organs that are supposed to fight these diseases, that are supposed to fight these pathogens. So these harmful habits can lower the body's ability to fight against pathogens. Another condition that can cause a body's ability to fight pathogens to be reduced is environmental pollution. For example, smoke. A person may not be smoking, may not be doing harmful things like smoking, but a person could be affected by smoke from an industrial plant or cars. So that is from environmental pollution. So those dangerous gases could affect the body's ability to fight pathogens. For example, carbon monoxide or CO could affect, that's carbon 2 oxide, it's also called carbon 2 oxide, can affect the body's ability to fight some pathogens or to resist pathogens. So these pathogens can cause some diseases, could cause a lung infection or lung problems and some other diseases. So those are the conditions that could cause the body's ability to fight or resist pathogens to be reduced. Now, let's talk about how microorganisms can enter the body. We've talked about insect vectors or carriers carrying these microorganisms around. So when these microorganisms want to enter the body of a human being or a person or an animal, how do they find their way in? So number one is through cuts, wounds, abrasions on the skins or openings on the skins. For example, we have Clostridium tetani, and that is found in the soil, which it could cause tetanus. So that is why when a person has an injury or cut that causes an opening on the skin of the person, most of the times, if the person is taken to the hospital, the person is given an anti-tetanus injection. Because when the body is exposed like that, there's a microorganism found in the soil called Clostridium tetani, and that could cause tetanus. So that is a way microorganisms find their way into the body. So another way is through the nose and the mouth. So the microorganisms that find their way into the body through this method are usually airborne most of the time. So through the nose and the mouth, these microorganisms can enter the body, maybe when the person is breathing in or when the person's mouth is open. So this microorganism can enter into the body of that person and cause diseases. An example of a disease that could be caused by microorganisms that enter through the nose and the mouth is influenza virus. Also, microorganisms could enter through the mouth and the esophagus. When we mentioned mouth and nose, that's through breathing. Then mouth and esophagus, that's probably through eating or drinking. So the esophagus is in the digestive tract. It's part of the digestive system. So microorganisms can enter through the digestive system when we are feeding or drinking something. An example is Entamoeba histolica, which enters the body and causes amoebic dysentery. So it could enter through the mouth and the esophagus. Another one is through direct contact. For example, the ringworm, the fungi, some fungi, and we have the spirochete, and that one causes syphilis. So those ones enter the body through direct contact. If the body comes in contact with those organisms or with those microorganisms, it could cause those diseases. So for example, the spirochete that we talked about that causes syphilis, it could enter the body through sexual intercourse with a person that is infected with syphilis. So the spirochete which causes syphilis, the microorganism that causes the syphilis, spirochete, or could say the pathogen that causes syphilis, can enter the body through sexual intercourse, which is a form of direct contact. Now, the last thing we have to talk about on this topic is how pathogens harm the body. We've talked about how they enter the body. Now, how do they harm the body? Like, what do they do in the body that causes diseases or that causes death or that causes the body to stop functioning properly? So, number one is by using the host's nutrients for their own growth and reproduction. So, when these pathogens enter the body, these pathogens are also living organisms. They are microorganisms. So, they use the host's nutrients for their own growth. They take the nutrients that the host is supposed to be getting for its normal functioning and use it to feed them their own self, use it to reproduce and become and multiply, and that would cause the host tissues to starve. So that harms the body. Obviously, if the tissues are not getting the normal required nutrients to survive, they will starve, and that could harm the body. So the second way pathogens can harm the body is by destroying the tissues of affected body parts. So the pathogens could affect some particular tissues. They could target some particular tissues. So these pathogens could destroy those tissues. And if some tissues in the body are destroyed, obviously that would cause something detrimental to the host body. So another way pathogens harm the body is by destroying affected tissues of the host body. So that's the end of today's lesson. See you next class.